Nicole Kidman didn't announce her divorce with a tearful interview or a press release written by her publicist. She didn't post a heartfelt message on Instagram or hint at heartbreak through a song or cryptic quote. Instead, the truth appeared quietly in a stack of legal documents filed at a Los Angeles courthouse. And inside those documents was one sentence that shocked Hollywood. Nicole Kidman, after 19 years of marriage to Keith Urban, was waiving all spousal support. No monthly payments, no long-term financial arrangement, no for the sake of fairness settlements that so often come with celebrity divorces. Nothing. She wasn't asking Keith for a single dollar. And even more surprising, Keith Urban wasn't asking her for anything either. A clean break, mutual, silent. But here's where the story turns from simple to strategic. Because when someone walks away from a nearly 2-decade marriage, one that built a combined empire of fame, awards, and fortune, without taking a single cent, it's not generosity, it's power. The filing didn't just reveal a divorce, it revealed a mindset, a plan that had been set in motion nearly 20 years earlier, long before anyone suspected the end was even possible. When the court documents surfaced, fans and journalists rushed to analyze them. How could two of the most successful people in entertainment, one a Hollywood icon, the other a country music legend, untangle nearly 20 years of marriage without financial chaos? The answer, hidden deep in the legal language, showed that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment split. It was something prepared for, protected against, and almost predicted. Nicole Kidman's decision not to seek spousal support wasn't a gesture of goodwill. It was a reflection of the life she built after surviving one of Hollywood's most public breakups. Because before Keith Urban, there was Tom Cruise. And that marriage, and the painful fallout that followed, taught Nicole one lesson she would never forget. In Hollywood, love is beautiful, but independence is everything. When Nicole and Keith first married in 2006, the world saw it as her happy ending, a gentle country singer saving the elegant movie star from the chaos of Hollywood. Their wedding in Sydney was picture perfect. It felt like a reset, quiet, romantic, grounded. But behind that soft image was a woman who had already learned what it meant to lose control of her narrative. The Nicole Kidman who walked down the aisle in 2006 wasn't naive. She was strategic. She had already lived through the heartbreak of a failed marriage under the public microscope. She knew what it felt like to have tabloids dissect every move, every rumor, every financial detail. So when she married Keith Urban, she made a decision that would quietly define the next 19 years of her life and the way it ended. That decision was a single document, a prenuptial agreement, and not just any prenup, one that drew a clear, sharp line between her world and his. A contract that said, "What's mine stays mine. What's yours stays yours." It was protective, precise, and absolute. At the time, few people knew the details. The press only caught fragments. Whispers about Nicole wanting to protect her assets, her children from her previous marriage, her future earnings. But now, nearly 2 decades later, that prenup has become the quiet foundation of one of the cleanest, most controlled divorces Hollywood has ever seen. When you look closely at the court filings from 2025, you see something fascinating. There are no disputes over property, no debates over shared accounts or investments, no legal battles over royalties, copyrights, or production rights. Every dollar, every contract, every earning was already divided long before the marriage ever ended. Nicole keeps her acting income, her production company's profits, her endorsements, her real estate. Keith keeps his music catalog, his touring revenue, and his performance rights. Everything's separate, everything's simple. It sounds clean, but the emotional meaning is far more complicated. Because when two people spend 19 years together, raising children, building a life, but keep their finances entirely separate, what does that say about the foundation of the marriage itself? It suggests something Nicole may never admit publicly. She never allowed herself to depend on Keith. Not financially, not emotionally, not in the way most couples do. To the world, Nicole Kidman's marriage looked like a fairy tale, but in practice, it was a partnership built on independence. Two successful people living under the same roof, but never fully merging their worlds. And that's why, when the end finally came, there was no chaos, no fighting, no messy financial drama splashed across TMZ, just a quiet filing, a few lines of text, and a truth that felt colder the more you read it. This wasn't just a breakup. It was the execution of a plan set in motion 19 years earlier. A plan to protect everything Nicole had built long before she ever said, "I do." But the story gets deeper because Nicole's decision to waive spousal support wasn't just about the past. It was about the power she holds in the present. When Forbes named her the highest paid actress in the world in 2024, just months before she filed for divorce, it wasn't just a headline, it was a reminder. Nicole Kidman doesn't need anyone's money, not Keith's, not anyone's. And that, more than any court filing, explains the confidence behind her silence. No press tours, no interviews, no emotional statements. Just one message delivered through legal paperwork. I don't need your support. But the deeper question, the one that people can't stop asking, is why now? After 19 years of marriage, why did Nicole Kidman decide to walk away? And why does the spousal support waiver matter so much? Because it doesn't just tell us about her financial independence. It reveals what really happened inside their marriage, the dynamics that quietly defined their relationship, and the trade-offs that may have been made long before the divorce was ever public. And as we dig deeper into those documents, we uncover the part no one expected, the part where love, money, and control collide in ways that rewrite everything we thought we knew about Nicole Kidman's marriage. Because while the headlines focused on what she didn't take from Keith Urban, the real story lies in what she did. To understand why Nicole Kidman walked away from a 19-year marriage without asking for a dime, you have to go back to the moment it all began. Not 2025, when she filed for divorce, but 2006, when she walked down the aisle in Sydney, smiling, radiant, and perfectly composed. Because that's when the real story started. Not the marriage, but the strategy. Nicole was 39 years old, one of the biggest stars in the world, and a woman who had already lived through the emotional wreckage of one of Hollywood's most public divorces. When her marriage to Tom Cruise ended in 2001, it didn't just break her heart, it broke her public image for a while. She was portrayed as the quiet, controlled half of a Hollywood power couple who suddenly became the outsider. The press painted her as the ex-wife, the one left behind while Cruise's career soared and his new romances dominated headlines. And through that chaos, Nicole learned something that would define the rest of her life. In Hollywood, love isn't what keeps you safe. Lawyers do. She learned how fragile everything becomes when emotion and business get tangled together. She learned how reputation can be destroyed overnight by rumors and speculation. And she learned the hardest truth of all, that sometimes the person who loves you today could turn into your biggest liability tomorrow. So, by the time she met Keith Urban, she wasn't the same woman she had been 5 years earlier. She was wiser, sharper, less romantic, still deeply loving, yes, but strategically aware. Keith was charming, grounded, and wildly talented, a country star who seemed to exist in a world far away from the chaos of Hollywood. He was the calm to her storm, the man who sang love songs instead of starring in sci-fi blockbusters. And for Nicole, that contrast was intoxicating. But even in love, she didn't lose her logic. Behind the scenes, before the vows, before the photographs, there was paperwork, thick, detailed, and deliberate. Nicole insisted on a prenup that would keep her finances entirely separate from Keith's. It wasn't about distrust, it was about survival. This wasn't a just-in-case document, it was a roadmap. A contingency plan designed by a woman who had already lived through the fallout of a high-profile divorce and swore she'd never be caught unprepared again. The terms were clear and firm. Nicole's film earnings? Hers alone. Keith's music revenue? His. Royalties, copyrights, investments, endorsement deals? All individually owned. Each kept control of their own careers, their own fortunes, their own futures. They would share a life, but never a ledger. And that's what made their marriage so fascinating. It was both deeply loving and deeply cautious at the same time. Nicole wasn't protecting herself from Keith. She was protecting herself for herself, because she knew something most people don't learn until it's too late. Independence isn't selfish, it's safe. That prenup became the quiet backbone of their marriage. It allowed both of them to live fully within their careers without worrying about whose money funded what. It also meant they could separate their successes and their failures without financial consequence. To outsiders, their life together looked glamorous and effortless. The red carpets, the award shows, the family photos, the speeches about love and trust, it all seemed pure. But beneath that perfection was a legal boundary line that never blurred. And the interesting part? They never pretended otherwise. In interviews, Nicole often spoke about her love for Keith in emotional, human terms. The connection, the gratitude, the balance he brought into her life. But she almost never mentioned shared finances or mutual investments. Her language was careful, consistent, and revealing. "We support each other's work," she'd say. Not, "we build together." That subtle difference, in hindsight, says everything. Because when a marriage is built on complete financial independence, it's not really about partnership. It's about parallel lives that run side by side. Close, but never overlapping. And while that independence might have protected them financially, it also built invisible walls. Keith once admitted in an interview that he felt pressure in the early years of their marriage. Pressure to match Nicole's success, to prove he was enough for her. At the time, it sounded romantic, but now, those words read differently, as hints of an imbalance that quietly existed beneath the surface. Nicole's career kept growing. Oscars, Emmys, producing credits, global deals. Keith's success remained steady, but not explosive. He was successful, yes, but his touring schedule pulled him away from home for months, and Nicole's career often kept her in different cities, on different sets, in different time zones. Financially, they were equals on paper. Emotionally, they were distant by circumstance. And yet, the prenup made it easy to ignore those cracks. Because when you never have to discuss money, when there's no shared bank account, no joint assets, you can also avoid the conversations that often revealed deeper problems. They didn't need to argue about spending, or saving, or income. Everything was already separate. Everything was already defined. But in protecting themselves from financial vulnerability, they may have built emotional distance too. Over the years, Keith spoke publicly about his struggles, his battle with addiction early in the marriage, the rehab stay that almost derailed their first year together. Nicole supported him through it. She stood by him, loved him, helped him rebuild. But even then, she stayed in control, personally and financially. That control wasn't coldness. It was security. She had seen what happens when you don't have it. The prenup didn't just protect her money, it protected her peace. Because if the marriage ever ended, and deep down, Nicole must have known that was always a possibility, she could walk away without fear, without chaos, without having to fight for what she'd already earned. And 19 years later, that's exactly what she did. The same document that protected her on her wedding day became her greatest advantage on her divorce day. The same strategy that once seemed cautious now looked prophetic. When she waived spousal support in 2025, people called it unexpected, but it wasn't unexpected at all. It was the natural conclusion to a marriage that was designed, from day one, to allow both people to leave whenever they needed to. No court battles, no bitterness, just 2 signatures, 2 careers, and 1 final act of independence. But this is where things start to twist, because while Nicole's decision to protect her wealth made her look powerful, and it absolutely was, it also revealed something much more personal. She didn't just build walls to protect her money. She built them to protect herself from ever being vulnerable again. And while those walls kept her safe, they also kept her separate. Safe from financial loss, yes, but not from loneliness. The marriage that began with so much love and stability slowly evolved into 2 worlds, one ruled by cameras and film sets, the other by music tours and hotel rooms. They weren't breaking apart in one dramatic moment. They were drifting, slowly, over years, until the emotional gap between them was as wide as their financial one. And when the end finally came, it was clean. Legally, yes, but also heartbreakingly symbolic. Because the very thing that made Nicole Kidman feel secure was also what ensured the marriage would never fully merge into one life. The prenup didn't ruin their love story. It just ensured that when it ended, no one would have to ask for anything. But that silence, that refusal to ask, carried another kind of message. Because when you don't need someone financially, you can walk away whenever love isn't enough anymore. And for Nicole, that moment had finally come. The paperwork proves it, but what comes next, what she gained instead of money, reveals even more about what she truly values. Because while Nicole didn't take Keith's money, she did take something else, something far more personal, something that showed where her priorities really were. And that's exactly what we'll uncover next. By the time Nicole Kidman filed for divorce in 2025, she wasn't just rich, she was one of the most financially powerful women in entertainment history. Forbes listed her as the highest-paid actress in the world multiple times throughout her career. Her net worth wasn't built on one blockbuster or one paycheck. It was built on decades of consistent strategy. She didn't just act in movies. She produced them. She didn't just appear in shows. She owned pieces of them. Every contract, every project, every deal was structured not just for fame, but for equity. From Big Little Lies to 9 Perfect Strangers, Nicole learns that power in Hollywood doesn't come from applause. It comes from ownership. And that's where the real story of this divorce begins. Because once a woman builds that kind of empire, money stops being about comfort. It becomes about leverage. And Nicole knew how to use it better than almost anyone. Over the years, her estimated fortune grew to well over $300 million, bolstered by production deals, endorsement contracts, and international ventures. Her wealth became self-sustaining. Even if she stopped acting tomorrow, the residuals and royalties alone could fund several lifetimes. Keith Urban, on the other hand, while successful in his own right, simply wasn't in the same league financially. His fortune, roughly half of Nicole's, came primarily from touring, record sales, and brand partnerships. It was impressive, yes, but more volatile. His income depended on the road, the fans, the shows. Nicole's income came from contracts, corporations, and ownership stakes. Wealth that multiplies even while you sleep. And that difference quietly shaped everything between them. When you're the higher earner, you hold invisible power. Not because you want to, but because it's always there. It influences decisions. It sets boundaries. It creates unspoken dynamics that linger in every argument, every choice, every compromise. Nicole had been in that position before. As Tom Cruise's equal-turned-subordinate in Hollywood's hierarchy, she had watched how being the less powerful one can shift not just public perception, but private respect. This time, she refused to be the one with less control. So when her marriage to Keith began, she didn't enter it as a wife dependent on her husband's success. She entered it as a brand, a global entity protecting its assets. And that's why, years later, when it all ended, she didn't need spousal support. Because financially, she had already won before the first papers were filed. But make no mistake, her decision wasn't about generosity. It was about optics. Because in Hollywood, perception is power. And Nicole understood that if she walked away from a 19-year marriage without asking for money, it would tell the world something very specific. That she wasn't the victim. That she wasn't abandoned. That she was the one in control. Think about it. How many times have we seen women in Hollywood divorce wealthy men and get labeled as gold diggers, trophy wives, or the one cashing out? Nicole wasn't about to let that narrative stick to her again. Not after what she endured post-Tom Cruise, when every headline dissected her personal life instead of her talent. This time, she wrote the ending herself. By waiving support, she turned her divorce into a power move. It wasn't Keith leaving Nicole, it was Nicole redefining herself. Again. Because nothing says, "I don't need you," louder than walking away from millions of dollars you're legally entitled to. Behind that single legal clause, petitioner waives all rights to spousal support, was a silent message. I built this empire myself. I can rebuild my life myself. I don't need your money, your name, or your sympathy. And for someone like Nicole, who's been underestimated, controlled, and talked over throughout her career, that message mattered more than any settlement check. It wasn't just personal, it was symbolic. She wanted the headlines to say, Nicole Kidman leaves Keith Urban and takes nothing. Not because she had nothing to gain, but because she had everything to prove. She was reclaiming her narrative, not as someone's wife, not as someone's ex, but as someone who had transcended the entire conversation about dependency. Because here's the truth, when a man waives spousal support, it's seen as noble. When a woman does it, it's revolutionary. And Nicole knew that. She's too intelligent, too media savvy, and too strategic not to. But while this move painted her as fiercely independent, it also hinted at something deeper, something the public didn't see. Because walking away from money is easy when you already have enough. But walking away from the emotional investment of nearly 2 decades, that's a different kind of sacrifice entirely. And that's where her story turns, from power to pain. Because as much as Nicole's decision made her look invincible, those who know her say it wasn't about money or pride at all. It was about freedom. Freedom from control. Freedom from performing happiness. Freedom from the weight of being half of a brand when she'd rather stand alone as a whole person. For years, she played the role of the elegant wife, the calm, supportive figure next to Keith on red carpets and award stages. But what no one realized was that she was also carrying the emotional load of a woman who'd outgrown her marriage long before she ended it. And that brings us to the next chapter, the emotional unraveling behind the glamour. Because behind closed doors, away from the cameras, the real cracks in their relationship weren't about money or fame. They were about distance, identity, and the price of success. Nicole Kidman didn't just file for divorce. She filed for liberation. But liberation always comes at a cost. And in Part 4, we'll uncover exactly what that cost was, the rumors of growing distance, the quiet tension between their careers, and the emotional signs that this picture-perfect love story had been fading long before anyone noticed.